Hey, Aaron Sorkin has a new movie coming out on Netflix. Should you watch it or skip it? Let's review it and analyze it. The Trial of the Chicago 7, coming up next. All right, The Trial of the Chicago 7, released on October 16, 2020, is a new movie from writer-director Aaron Sorkin, whom you know from screenplay writing. He's one of the few people known for his screenplays, A Few Good Men. He did the TV series The West Wing, Social Network, and on and on and on. And here he directs his second feature film. And this movie has a fairly large cast of pretty famous actors: Sacha Baron Cohen, Mark Rylance, Eddie Redmayne, and on, Michael Keaton in a guest spot here. And this movie is about the trial of the Chicago 7, 7 people indicted for inciting riots during the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago. And this movie is very clearly on the side, I think, of those who were indicted for the crime of inciting the riots. The movie begins with a montage about the 1960s, really foregrounding the war in Vietnam and the draft and those who went over to serve in Vietnam and died. And that is what the 7 people on trial here were protesting when they went to the Democratic National Convention in 1968 with the election between Richard Nixon, the Republican candidate, and Hubert Humphrey, the Democratic candidate. And this is a courtroom drama almost solely, with some flashbacks and a little bit of flash forwards, but mostly courtroom drama, and it depends on a lot of tension between primarily the judge in this case, played wonderfully by Frank Langella, and then the lawyers for the defendants, including the main lawyer, Mark Rylance. He probably has the largest part in this movie as far as dialogue, the amount of dialogue goes. Now, those who watch this channel from other countries must know the incident we're talking about here, I don't think is well known in American culture, period. I barely knew about it. I was born 10 years after the trial. And then people Aaron Sorkin's age, he was 8 or 9 when the trials took place, or even older. I think if you ask them point blank, do you remember the trial of Chicago 7? They probably say, I don't know what that is, or yeah, barely remember it. And so this movie is trying to bring back this incident as of major importance and set it in a modern day 2020 American context. Of course, the movie was made before this, and the studios were not picking it up. It had a hard time being shopped around, so Netflix picked it up. It's a little bit older movie, although this has been timed to coincide with, unfortunately, the American presidential and federal government elections for 2020, which are just nasty and annoying, and most of us want to get away from it. But here you've got yet another movie that, in an oblique sense, is weirdly about either the 2020 campaign or the Trump presidency overall. And the movie features, I think, the way I watch it, the Chicago 7, those under trial, as really being picked on unjustly by the justice system, so-called. One of the questions is, they're all lumped together as a group, indicted together. Should they all be tried separately? And that comes up with a Black Panther named Bobby Seale, who repeatedly claims in court, and is very obstinate about this, that he is not being represented by a lawyer. The judge in this case, the Frank Langella character, keeps trying to shut him down, and at one point even gags him. And there's some very obvious scenes and obvious political messages involving him. Eventually they declare a mistrial for him, so his tactics, I guess, worked. But clearly the question is the judge racist or bigoted in this case? The answer is definitely yes in terms of this movie, and the Black Panthers are being discriminated against. Obviously, this is a metaphor, analogy to justice, modern-day justice in America, circa 2016 to 2020. Now, one of the contrasts in this movie is between an upstart, idealistic, young, good-looking, clean-cut guy, played by Eddie Redmayne, his name is Tom Hayden, and sort of the quirky, anarchic Abby Hoffman character with an afro, played by Sacha Baron Cohen. These two are together when they're tried. They're part of the Chicago 7, yet they have different goals, different aims. The anarchic Hoffman wants to mess with the system and create, as he calls it, a cultural revolution. The Tom Hayden character does not like that so much. He wants a political revolution to stop the Vietnam War. Both of them want to shut down Vietnam and to protest it, but they have different aims. And here you have the overt discussion of all of these people being lumped together under the leftist banner, and cultural revolution, the question of should it happen or not, given the injustice, the unfairness of the legal system, a word that is used over and over again in this movie, headed by the ridiculous judge in this movie, who may be one of the worst judges I've ever seen in a movie. The movie is clearly not on his side at all. And some of the best moments in the movie are between the judge and either those who are protesting in the court, or especially the lawyer for the Chicago 7, the Mark Rylance character. And the movie asks a lot of questions. Was this a political trial instead of a real criminal trial? Was this just a politically motivated trial by the Nixon administration? And was this sort of Republican versus Democrat politics being played here? Well, did the police start the riots, or did the protesters start the riots? Maybe the police are to blame. And I think the movie really does actually sort of side with the protesters, the rioters. And we probably can't even call them that because the police supposedly start the riots, even though the Chicago 7 are being indicted for starting the riots. Now, that's all very timely because in the summer of 2020 in America, we had protests, we have riots, and we have people complaining that, no, they're not protests at all, they're riots, and other people, including the news media, saying they're just peaceful protesters. So here we are with this movie sort of talking to us, talking about this moment. Maybe not even that it wanted to. Sorkin clearly wrote the screenplay way before this stuff happened, but this perpetual question, I think, in America is, what is a protester? What's a rioter? What's the difference? And do we have the right to be revolutionaries against the system, whatever that is? Now, this movie is somewhat entertaining, somewhat boring. I was shocked that the Sacha Baron Cohen character really came across as, to me, quite boring. The jokes fell flat. Frankly, they're just boomer jokes to me. And he, most of the time, is very preachy, even though there's a framing device where he's telling the story to an audience, almost like at a comedy club, and the story of the movie to this audience, and the audience is laughing at it, and yet I didn't find this movie funny at all. The movie is also strangely very dark, very low lit. The courtroom, even though this is an age of electricity, and you can see the electrical lights in the courtroom, is as dim as, say, a movie set in the 19th century. I recall the Coen brothers' True Grit and the trial scene in that, when of course there'd be no electric lights, so it'd be dimly lit. But here, very dimly lit, and I couldn't quite figure out why it's so dark. So that's just an aesthetic choice this movie makes I couldn't quite make sense of. And the movie very clearly says the leftists are outside the system. They need to practice some anarchy, some peaceful protests, some revolutions to stop the system as it is. And, I don't buy really any of that because I find that the leftists, whoever they are, have mostly been part of the system, as the end of the movie shows you, where these characters grow up to become stockbrokers or legislators. Yes, they were hippies once, but then they grew up to be part of the system they were sort of against. There's a very funny song I like from Ben Folds, The Ascent of Stan. Go listen to it, but it's about that very phenomenon of the hippies becoming the man. And so I think this is a flashback to the 1960s, semi-boomer movie that's validating the 1960s as a place and as a thing. There's a trick in the movie, though, that I think is a problem, which is that the movie says that what it's portraying is real and true and honest, and yet the movie knows it's not real or true or honest. There's a scene with telephone. Remember the game of telephone where people say a story on the telephone, and then the next person has to pass on the same story, and then the next person. And the claim is that you play that game of telephone, you will tell the story accurately across the telephone wires, or, as the metaphor goes, down through the ages. This movie is claiming it's sort of the truth of what actually happened, I think, during the Chicago 7 trials, which is a problem because we all know that historical films are fibbing or lying or stretching the truth, or that they're about the present day as much, if not more so, than they are about accurately representing the past. I think the movie knows that. I think Sorkin knows it, and yet it passes itself off as real, I think. And that's shown, in the trial. You have the trial of people testifying and then flashbacks to the past, and there is really no difference between their testimony and the flashbacks. Film is a medium that actually lies, and we know that film can fib as far as historical truth goes. That's been true as far back as Rashomon, or even go back even earlier in that film history. So for this film to, sort of fib about film telling historical truth, I think you should watch it very carefully and closely for its ideology, how it applies to, say, 2020 or the last 5 years in America or something like that. But I wouldn't actually believe this movie to be true, and I don't. So that's part of my judgment here. Overall, there's some good moments, there's some boring moments, and frankly, I would rather watch Groucho Marx than Abby Hoffman. That's more entertaining and more anarchic. And, you know, if I'm going to watch Suits versus the Cultural Revolutionaries, I might as well watch The Matrix. It's pretty much the same thing. Now, if you like Sorkin, if you like his historical details, if you like sort of snappy lines, and to dig deep down into the heavy details of an incident that, you know, may come and go and people might forget about it, well, this movie's for you. I think those that like The West Wing probably will like this movie. But, you know, I'm tired of politics at this point. It's October. It's mid-October in America. I've been slammed with ads and mailings, and I can't stand this stuff anymore. Leave me alone with federal government politics. Go do whatever you want to do. Leave me alone. I'm done with it. So if you don't like federal government politics or the election at this moment, do not watch this movie. So overall, I think this movie is average. And so 2.5 to 3 stars is what I give it out of 5. That means some of you should watch it, some of you shouldn't, and you probably know who you are, if you should avoid it or not. What do you think of this movie? What do you think about what I said? Do you agree or not? Let us know in the comments, and be kind. Please subscribe to this channel for more great movie content. Greatly appreciate your participation. Thank you and have a good day. And there's definitely a vibe. This movie wants to attack the notions that hippies are wimps. In fact, at one point, the Jerry Rubin character is tough and brave, and he saves a woman from being raped. And Abby Hoffman is witty and smart, and he's with it, and he's very brilliant. He's sort of a Machiavellian genius in a lot of ways. So this movie is countering the notion that hippies are just total goofballs, stoner goofballs. Yeah, they are that, the movie says, but they're also geniuses and tough guy heroes. Now, whether you buy that or not, I don't think I do, but this movie wants to argue that, so there you go.